Hello, folks. This is your host, Tammy Tuckey, and you are now listening to the Tiara Talk Show. We bring you rare interviews with the makers of Disney magic. Whether they be singers, actors, Imagineers, animators, they have all made their mark on the Disney name. Be sure to check out the show notes, other episodes, contests, our social media pages from Facebook to Twitter, and more on our official website at www.thetiaratalkshow.com. Are you looking to plan and book an upcoming Disney vacation? Contact the Tiara Talk Show's official travel agent, James from Destinations in Florida, by visiting destinationsinflorida.com/tiara for a free quote. The link is also included in the show notes on our website. All guest opinions are theirs and theirs alone and do not represent the opinions of the Tiara Talk Show or the host. The Tiara Talk Show is not associated with the Disney Company. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode. And from all of us here at the Tiara Talk Show, have a hoop-de-doo day. I'm excited to welcome this week's Tiara Talk Show guest, former Disney animator David Pruiksma, to the show. Welcome, David.
Hey, good to hear from you.
We were just talking off air how it's been 3 years since we talked on my last podcast, and I think that's pretty crazy, but we're coming closer to the Atlantis, the Lost Empire 15th anniversary, and I really wanted to have you on my new show, so I'm so glad we could talk today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And so I first wanted to start out with some of your beginnings as an animator, what really inspired you to go into this field and also work with the Disney Company and other companies to create such wonderful masterpieces with animation.
Well, I'll tell you, it started when I was very, very young. I remember the first time specifically stating that I wanted to be an animator when they showed Alice in Wonderland on the Wonderful World of Color in 1964. I remember we went down to my neighbor's house to see it in color, and I turned to my mom at some point during the Mad Tea Party sequence and said, "That's what I want to do." And, of course, they were patronizing and said, "Oh, of course, of course." But it never really left. I started making little films with Super 8 cameras and always was drawing and always was watching, animation on television, whether it be Hanna-Barbera or Disney. My interest just continued to grow over the years, and, I just kept doing it. And then I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York, and studied art and film. And then from there, they said, really, where you need to be is California. So I packed up and moved to the West Coast and did 2 years at California Institute of the Arts, Cal Arts, until Disney contacted me and said they were interested in having me come over to work on Mickey's Christmas Carol and The Black Cauldron at that time. And I never really thought I'd work for Disney. It wasn't really, a forefront in my mind, but it kind of worked out, and I ended up spending the next 20 years there.
I think that's simply amazing. And around that time when you're first coming in, there was another project, which I did not know this. You worked on Buzzy, the character from Cranium Command. And Buzzy's so adorable. He's an animated character. And then you go into the attraction. If listeners have not seen it before, it's called Cranium Command. And you could see the video online. But Buzzy starts out as an animated character and then goes into the three-dimensional character when you're in this theater and inside the human head. So working on Buzzy, were you actually in Florida in the Fishbowl at the Magic Disney Animation Pavilion working on this project?
No, the animation was actually done in California in a warehouse that ended up being Airway, which ends up where we did Beauty and the Beast. But it was just basically a warehouse where they took some of us off of Rescuers Down Under, a handful of us, and asked us to come over and work on the short. We didn't do a lot of shorts at that time. I think they were doing some of the Roger Rabbit shorts and some featurettes. They asked us to do this, and Rob Minkoff was the original director on that, and he asked me to be supervising animator on Buzzy. So I was very happy. That was my first opportunity to be a supervising animator. I came on when it was pretty well developed. And then they pulled Rob off to do a short in Florida, Roger Rabbit short. I think it might have been Roller Coaster Rabbit. And they brought in Kirk and Gary as their first stint as directors. And that's really where I got to know them and really love working with them. And that continued later on with me getting cast on Mrs. Potts and eventually other characters they had in their other films, Victor and Hugo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and finally Packard in Atlantis.
for those who have not seen Atlantis, please pause this interview, go watch it. You need to see it. It's a 2001 animated film that I feel does not get as much recognition as it should. And there's a character named Packard, and she is she's pretty old. She's up there, but she's in charge of the communications of the Atlantis troupe. She is quite a different Disney character. I don't think we've ever seen anyone like her, and the last one to actually smoke too. I should point that out. And she's not really a moving character of all sorts. You know, was that a little bit easier to animate on your end?
Actually, doing nothing in animation is harder to animate than anything else because you have to keep the character alive through expression and whatnot without doing a lot of heavy movement. Action animation is probably some of the easiest animation to do, but subtle, very subtle, restrained animation, it can be very difficult. It was quite a switch for me because I was always sort of cast on the cutesy-poo, motherly, warm, parental kind of characters like the Sultan and Aladdin, etc. But then to get this character that was crusty and obnoxious and smoking and whatnot, it was really quite a departure for me. It was a lot of fun to break away and do a different kind of role.
And you got to meet Florence Stanley, who voices the character of Packard, correct?
Oh yeah. We usually go to the recording sessions, especially early on, to kind of get a feel for what they feel the characters are and what we feel the characters are, and it creates a blend so that we're all on the same page. I mean, I went to some of the recording sessions and I loved what she was doing, so it was really great. Right from the start, she seemed to get the character and get the personality, and it made it easier for me to interpret that even further in the animation. But yeah, she's there's nothing like having a great voice in animation. Doing pantomime animation is really very difficult because you don't have the voice to springboard off of, and it made it a lot of fun to actually take those sort of acerbic little jabs and then not push that animation, not make her move a lot. Everything comes out of her disdainful expressions.
You're now a professor of animation at the Laguna College of Art and Design, and it seems like your students love Packard as much as I do, and they like to play pranks on you a little bit sometimes?
Oh, yes, all the time. They're always doing stuff. They'll take an image of Packard off the internet and alter it and, put her nose upside down or her mouth upside down or something like that. They're always playing little pranks on me. And of course, the battle cry is we're all going to die when things get stressful, which is kind of comic relief in a way.
Yeah, that's right. That's her catchphrase, of course. And
yes.
I think she probably has the best lines in the film. Shh, don't tell anybody else I said that to you. But I think she really does have the best lines in the film, and I love the post-Disney Renaissance films, and I saw that you worked on The Emperor's New Groove, but it didn't really credit you for a specific character. What exactly did you work on for that film?
Well, interestingly enough, I took not a leave of absence, but I went into training for a while at the studio after The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It was a very difficult film for me to do. I came on late on the production and did the entire film in about 8 months, and I think I touched every single scene of the Gargoyles, Victor and Hugo, because I was a supervising animator and I had to draw over things for cleanup to make sure the characters looked consistent. But after that, I took a brief break and I did some training, which was good, for my later career as an instructor. I was noted as being one of the best trainers at the studio, according to Peter Schneider and those in power at the time. They wanted me to be there, as they said, their Eric Larson, which was flattering, but I really wanted to get back into animation. So they were developing Kingdom in the Sun, and they had a large group of llamas that they wanted me to do the main llama, which was Snowball, the prima donna llamas. But then later on, they had me design the other 7 llamas in the herd, and each one had to be different, had to have a different personality, very much like the dwarfs. Now, that ended up not happening, and it ended up being shelved. And fortunately, Don was the executive producer on that film, and he saw that I was going to be coming available. And so I moved right over onto Packard, which is the character I would have handpicked to do on Atlantis. And so I went right on to Atlantis, and then they retooled Emperor's New Groove, and I wasn't available for that. So some of my design work ended up influencing the film Emperor's New Groove, particularly on the main character as a llama. Of course, every animator makes it their own, and they design it, redesign, and add little personal traits in the film. Then I went on to do Atlantis, and I think it was a good move for me. On Atlantis, I was cast on Packard and also on Harcourt, who only really appears at the beginning of the film. Also, David Ogden Stiers did the voice, and he's a veteran of Disney voiceover. It's like I said, it's always fun to have a great voice to animate too.
He is so talented. And you worked on Beauty and the Beast too, which is another project he worked on as Cogsworth. So you're working on Mrs. Potts and Chip at the same time?
Yes, Chip was developed late in the film. Actually, he was a character that was kind of a throwaway gag, as one of her cups was chipped, and it was a son of hers that was named Chip. But the early animation on the character and the voice that they cast, Bradley Pierce, ended up charming people to the point where they took one character out and replaced that character with Chip. And so I had to do a lot of the animation of Chip again in the last few months of production.
Mrs. Potts is a wonderful character as well, and voiced by Angela Lansbury. So when you're going in to watch her read for the role, what type of mannerisms are you looking for to include in Mrs. Potts' traits? Because she is an inanimate object, not really human.
Well, there were a lot of challenges. It's just challenges on every character. You have to kind of overcome them and find ways, imaginative and creative ways of animating them. In the case of Potts, of course, she was just a head. She really didn't have any body or any arms or legs. So I had to find ways around that when those things were needed. But as far as Angela goes, I knew she was cast as the voice when I was cast on the character. And they recorded the Be Our Guest song first. And so I was animating on that, and then I got through a number of scenes in that, and then we got together with Angela in the recording studio when she was coming in to do some more work, and showed her the animation, and we went over the storyboards together, and basically she and I both talked a lot about our influences for the character and who we thought the character was, and we were pretty much in agreement about which way we should go with it. I think she said that it was helpful for her to see the animation because then she could see how that was interpreted. Her performance was interpreted in the animation, and it made her later performances even better, which gave me, of course, more to work with. As far as mannerisms go, people say, oh, she looks just like Angela Lansbury, when in actuality, she looks nothing like Angela Lansbury. She acts like Angela Lansbury. She has those little quick head movements and, tilting the head a lot and whatnot, which I got a lot of from watching Angela's performances on all her films over the years. She has a very staccato way of talking, and she uses a lot of little head nods and head bobs and head tilts, which worked perfectly with a character that's basically a head on a pedestal. So it was very helpful to have that reference. But yeah, one thing you can say about those post-Renaissance films is, despite how people may feel about them one way or the other, they are all superbly animated by a crack crew of people. That machine was unstoppable at that time, and they could throw anything in front of us, and we could bring it to life. And that was the result of all those films that came before that.
I just love seeing the behind-the-scenes featurettes to some of the films, including there's one of Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Jason Alexander comes over to your table because you're animating some of the gargoyles. What was that like to film with Jason?
That was very, very difficult. Jason's a superb actor, all those years on Seinfeld and all the other things that he's done, including Broadway. And I'm not an actor. Well, I am an actor. I'm an actor with a pencil. But, when I get in front of the camera, I get very nervous. And to have someone else's words to say was very difficult for me. So he had to do this big, long intro. And then he'd turn to me and I'd say, that's right, Jason, blah, 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 blah. And I could not say the words the way they were written. And so finally, after the fourth or fifth take, I apologized to Jason. I said, look, I'm really sorry. He says, that's okay. If they made me sit down and animate, I couldn't do it. So I said, well, is it all right? I asked the director, is it all right if I just say the same thing in my own words? And they said, of course. So we did another take, and I did it in one take. So that made it a little easier for me. It's just to be able to say someone else's words in your voice and do so with a natural cadence is very difficult. And I'm always amazed that actors are able to do that.
Did you get a chance?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say a funny story about Packard. I recently was doing some work over at Heritage Auctions in Beverly Hills, and I had some images of Packard, and they brought them back in the back, and one of the younger girls said, "Oh my God, Packard, Atlantis. I'm just amazed at that film." And she's a big fan like you are, and she was going through the drawings, the Xeroxes that I had done, and saying, it's like, oh, this, and she was doing the voice, it's like, "We're all gonna die," or "I sleep in the raw," and all of those kinds of lines, which I thought was really funny. And then he brought her in and introduced her to me, and she was so happy, to be able to say how much she enjoyed the character, and that made me feel good too, because it's always nice to know that your work is appreciated. So that was kind of a funny little circumstance that happened at Heritage Auctions.
Wow, what are the chances? Like,
I know,
really?
it was really very odd.
Well, that's cool. I think that's amazing. So what type of drawings were you showing her? Were they just from the actual film, or just things that you sketched for yourself?
They were Xeroxes of model sheets and whatnot that we were going over. Sometimes they asked me to authenticate things and whatnot, and so sometimes I go over there. But yeah, it was just really fun to see that she loved the show so much.
Well, I want to make sure I open the opportunity for you to discuss any new projects you're working on, because I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about those.
Well, let's see. As far as what I'm doing, I really enjoy teaching. Almost as big a thrill as animating for me. I really love working at Laguna College of Art and Design. I think we've developed a really, really crack animation program there, and our enrollment just keeps to grow larger and larger as word gets out that we're doing something right. Pixar picks from our people, and they think that we're doing things the right way, in that we train not just technology, but actual acting, performance, hand-drawn, design, all of those things. We give them a foundation of actually being thinking artists first, and then we start adding in the technology so that they are well-balanced thinkers and leaders in the future of animation.
Well, I have to thank you so much for coming on the show, David. But I want to ask you 3 Disney questions. I always ask my guests. I call them the Fab 3.
Okay.
So we'll start with the Donald question, which is, when you were younger, what Disney film was one of your favorites to see on the big screen?
Without a doubt, Peter Pan. I just love that film. I still think it's probably one of the best they ever did. It has everything. It has great songs. It has great characters. It tells the story really well, and it tells it in a way that only animation can tell it. It's got great characters, great character animation, beautiful art direction. I mean, to me, it's just, for my taste, it's the perfect film. Now, you ask a different animator, you're going to get a completely different response on a completely different film, but I bet they'll have the same critique of it.
But our goofy question, what Disney character do you think would be your best friend if you met them in person? And we'll exclude any of the characters that you have animated.
Well, I would say probably Goofy. I really love the Goofy shorts that were done, particularly the ones by Kenny in the 50s and late 40s. They're just such wonderful films, so funny that, they stand up with the Tex Averys and the MGM films of that time. They're of an era, but they're just so much fun to watch still. And I just think, since I'm a little goofy, I think that Goofy would be a very good friend.
And our Mickey question, if I asked you to name any Disney song at this very moment, what immediately comes to mind?
Well, I have to say, With a Smile and a Song, which is from Snow White. It's just a beautiful, beautiful song. And it's one of my favorites. There's also, there's a couple of others that are sort of lesser favorites. It's funny because they're all ones that aren't really big songs. My Mother from Peter Pan is a really, Your Mother and Mine, I think it's called, is a really great song as well.
I love that one too. Nobody's mentioned either of them, so there you go. Kudos to you, David. And I have to say, happy 15th anniversary to Atlantis. I hope we can possibly celebrate with a Packard cake that says we're all gonna die.
Yeah, a Packard cake would probably do that too. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be on your show.
We're all gonna die.